In September 2012, I traveled to Philadelphia to attend the annual conference of NAPS, now the International Association of Peer Specialists. There I interviewed 26 individuals and heard some truly inspiring stories of recovery. One story in particular stood out. It wasn't one of recovery, it was an extraordinary example of advocacy that a peer can bring as a member of a behavioral health care team. The situation involved the uncertain future of a 73-year-old woman, a long-term resident of a state hospital now facing closure. Scott Heller was facilitating a community support plan meeting to determine the woman's future. Attending, as the woman's peer supporter, Gina Calhoun made a dramatic stand that allowed the woman to speak for herself and be heard. Here is the story as told by Gina Calhoun and her now husband, Scott Heller.
I recall actually the first time that we had worked together was one of the first what we called the community support plan meetings for the closure folks. The idea was that each person who was a resident at the hospital was going to have a meeting or a series of meetings with the treatment team that they worked with on the hospital unit, community people from the county that they were going to return to would come in, providers, and people that the individual themselves chose to be at the meeting. Sometimes it was family people, sometimes it was just them, sometimes it was them and a peer supporter who they were working with. The idea about these meetings was this was going to be an opportunity for everybody to sit down at the table and really explore, given that the hospital was going to close, what was going to be the best course of action for the individual in terms of what would happen next for them. Where would they go? Would they go back into the community, and if so, where in the community? Or would they perhaps, go to another hospital, because some people may be transferred to a hospital in the area that was going to be made available for them. But these planning meetings were designed to really have an opportunity for everybody to get input. I worked for many years at state hospitals and had been actually a treatment team director and been on many multidisciplinary treatment teams. Often the way treatment teams worked at state hospitals would be the treatment team would decide collectively, without the individual there, what they thought was the best recommendation for the individual in terms of their treatment, whether they should stay at the hospital or what course of action ought to be taken. The team would sort of decide, then call the individual in and say, here's your plan, sign it. These community support plan meetings were supposed to be different than that. And this was one of the first ones. So I was facilitating from the State Office of Mental Health. I was facilitating this meeting. Wasn't sure what to expect. I knew ideally how they were supposed to go, but hadn't been part of one yet. So I came in as a facilitator, and Gina was the peer supporter. We had a table full of people. The doctor was there, the nurse was there, the social worker, the psych aides, a couple of folks from the community mental health program who represented the county the person might return to was there. And this first meeting, the individual came in with Gina, and apparently Gina and she had been working together for several weeks prior to this meeting, right?
No, we had been working together for 6 months prior, because this was one of the people that had been using the services at the state hospital for over 10 years. And so we had worked together, and she was an older adult. She was in her 70s. And so we had been working together for months, one, to establish a mutually trustful relationship, two, to explore, hey, what's out there in the community that you might be interested in? And we discovered she wasn't really interested at 73 and going back to work, but she wanted some meaning in her life, and she wanted to develop relationships with other people her age. We had worked with the Department of Aging to find out where the senior centers were. She had visited them. She knew a little bit about her living space and what she wanted. She wanted her own bedroom. And she was very nervous about going into her community support planning meeting, because she was used to the treatment meetings where even if she had a perspective or an opinion, she wasn't going to get the chance to really announce that. And I had assured her that this was actually her meeting.
This is a new process.
This is a new process. We threw away discharge plans. We're now implementing community support plans. You are the owner of this process, so you are going to have a say. And the biggest say in what you need and want to live and recover in the community. We had worked really, really hard so that she could feel self-confident in going in and expressing her needs and wants. So she gets into the meeting, and this is what happens.
So I walk in as a facilitator. I had not met the individual before, and I didn't know the treatment team. I hadn't worked with them before. But again, in this new process, somebody who was independent was going to facilitate somebody who was not part of the treatment team or not part of the community. So I came in as an independent, objective person who was going to facilitate the meeting. So I sat down, started to facilitate the meeting. Treatment team is there. The person's there. I forgot her name.
We don't want to say it.
We don't want to say it?
Because we
Okay.
don't know if
Well, we'll call her Nancy. Nancy was there. And so open up the process. Say, okay, Nancy's here, and this is her community support plan meeting, and let's talk about where we all think things are at. Well, the physician, the psychiatrist, starts to talk, and he lays out the fact that Nancy had been there for many, many years at the state hospital, that she was getting up in years, that she had some physical health issues, that she was really unable to take care of herself in a community setting. And the treatment team had met and talked about it and really decided that they needed to recommend that she be transferred to another state hospital.
And this whole time, poor Nancy is looking at me like, oh my goodness, we have this relationship and I trusted you, and all of a sudden I'm in, and it's the same kind of meeting I've always been in.
So about that time, I'm like trying to get some of the other treatment team members to sort of say, well, what's your perspective? And they were pretty much, I think, in unison. I kind of think maybe they had discussed, together what their joint recommendation was going to be, before we had gotten to that meeting. So they pretty much reaffirmed and supported each other's decision that the recommendation ought to be for her to go to another state hospital. The community person who was there, I happened to know him. I had worked with him in other settings, and I think that he was somewhat intimidated by the credentials, the doctor and the nurse and the social worker all making these strong recommendations that she really needed to be able to be safe and to be healthy, to be taken care of and protected. She needed to be transferred. So he kind of shrugged his shoulders and went along with it.
So finally my passion got the best of me, and I pounded both hands on the table, stood up, and I said, the community support planning process is a different process. It's not business as usual. And this is Nancy's meeting, and it's Nancy's chance to voice her plans to live in the community. And all of a sudden, everybody's going, oh my goodness, there's some blonde bombshell in the room. And then Scott took over.
There was a momentary pause as there was this whirl of action and flailing arms and blonde hair and activity at the end of the table. So everybody looked down that way, and that momentarily kind of, I think froze people in their place. It was like, okay, what happens next? What do we do? Now, fortunately, as a facilitator, we had some training and support from the other facilitators to kind of learn how to facilitate that process of saying, okay, take an opportunity to focus the meeting back on the individual and ask to hear from them about what it is that they want, what their perspective is. So I took that opportunity when everybody was paused with the, kind of unsettledness as, what's going to happen next. To look down at that end of the table and say, well, it seems like we need to hear from Nancy in terms of what are her thoughts on what she needs and wants.
And Nancy was so articulate and beautiful in expressing that, yes, I have some medical needs and I still have some challenges, but I would like to have my own bedroom and perhaps be surrounded with other people in the house that I could be friends with. And she expressed she wanted to go to the senior center, and she had already visited the drop-in center. And oh, by the way, the drop-in center is very enthusiastic and loves to crochet and knit, and so does she. And they have plans for her to knit and crochet baby Afghans at the church nearby so that every child that's baptized would get a baby Afghan. And she was so articulate that all of a sudden she, not us, is changing the viewpoint and the emotions in the room. And
I think that's a great example of what peer support is really about. A lot of times people talk about the peer support being an advocate for the person. I think, again, when that peer support works really well, they're an advocate with the person, and they can help get it started. But they've talked, they've developed a relationship. Gina knew about Nancy and knew what some of Nancy's interests were, and they had kind of prepared for this. And I think at that moment, though, Nancy could have had a difficult time getting started with her voice because of all the other strong voices in the room, from the people that had the credentials and the people that were certain that they knew what needed to happen for her in her life. But Gina got it started, and then the preparation, Nancy's voice came out, and people, I think, were surprised for the first time to really hear that voice, and that, and to be able to say clearly, what was important to her and what she needed. That really kind of, I think that took the kind of wind out of the sails of some of the folks that felt as though they knew Nancy better than Nancy knew herself.
But the neat thing about it was, when the dynamics and the emotions and the culture started to shift, the gentleman from the county said, "Oh, you've already made a connection in the community. That's great." So all of a sudden now he's starting to really say this could be a possibility. And then you had one of the psychologists at the hospital that says, "I think this might work." And so by the end of the meeting, and it was a pretty long meeting, it probably lasted about 2.5 hours, everyone signed that they were in agreement with the community support plan. And for the first time, I believe Nancy signed knowing she was part of her own planning process. So walking out the door, she looked at me and she said, "You and that guy just changed or saved my life." And I said, "No, we didn't. We created an opportunity for you to get out there in the community and transform your own life." And I will tell you, she is today still living in what we call specialized community residency. So it's an open house where there are six people that have mental health challenges, that are older adults and have medical needs. They all live in a house together. And they really have, as a joint household, said that they wanted a van because only one of them drives and they don't have a car, and they really are at a place in their life at 70 and older that they want to get a driver's license or drive anyways. So they got a van. It's not a van that has the nice little name of the house on it. It's just a plain van, and they love it. They all love it. She goes to the senior center. She loves it. And it really made a difference when she was able to say, "Hey, I have a plan, and this is what I need and want." And I think it really, because it was one of the first meetings, it really set the tone for the rest of the CSP meetings.